everybody. My name is Scotty Veland, and I am an MLIS student at the University of Maryland, but due to some staffing things, I and my other colleague have been running the instruction outreach department in the special collections since last October. I've been able to kind of take over that thing, and that's why I'm participating in this panel in particular. So hopefully you all enjoy the presentation.
Hi everyone, I'm Miriam Intrator. I'm interim head for archives and special collections and digital initiatives, and I'm special collections librarian for rare books at Ohio University.
Hi everyone, my name is Carolyn Runyon. I'm the director of special collections at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Anderberg. I'm the interdisciplinary science and technology librarian and the Poly archivist at Dibner Library and Poly Archives. This is on the Brooklyn campus of New York University.
I'm going to drop the link to the Padlet in the chat.
Okay, so I think we're going to switch over. We were just going to show you, we have the Padlet link here, and you should be able to access that in the chat. And then Miriam, if you can, yeah, we might need to like change screens over. We were just going to show you how we have the Padlet set up and make sure everyone kind of knows how to add to the Padlet. We use Padlet because this is kind of how the TPS Festa got started. So we were hoping people had a little bit of familiarity with Padlet. But even if you haven't, it should be pretty easy to use. We have this set up because we're going to be doing our presentations first, but we also want you to be able to add ideas, experiences, questions, or lessons learned if you have been doing similar work to the Padlet as we're doing the presentation, or you can continue to add to this as we move into the discussion. So basically what's happening here is we have these separate sections. Thank you, Scotty, for making our sections. You can see that we've pre-filled the lessons learned and questions. There's a couple of them in here already. So what we're gonna do is either you can add something new, or you could upvote one of the things that's already there. You would upvote by clicking the thumbs up, or you could add on to a comment if you wanted. I think, and then Carolyn, did you want to show how to, were you adding? I forget how we were doing this. Am I adding? Are you upvoting?
I dropped one in, but because I'm not, I added one, but if you wanted to upvote one of them to just show how that works, or yeah, if Miriam wanted to upvote one, that'd be great.
Yeah, so you can see here the I'll just kind of walk us through it. Right, there we go. Thanks, everybody. We can kind of see some action happening here in the Padlet. So basically the little plus sign at the top is if you're adding an entirely new post and you want to write something new in the post. Oh, I see. It's showing up on my screen, but not there. There we go. And so that you can add that if you would like. And then once something new is added, we're going to use those thumbs up or comments to upvote things, basically to help us guide the discussion time at the end and make the best use of our time. So this way we can capture everything, but also the ones that have the most votes are things that we can kind of move to the front to talk about. But with that, I think we're ready to get into it.
Just give me a second to get back to the slideshow.
Great. So we'll be switching back to our slides. If you lose the link to the Padlet or the slides, just let us know in the chat and we'll get them back to you.
Sorry, one sec.
So I'll be starting us off talking about my program, which was a partnership 4-credit semester-long internship that runs every spring here at the University of Maryland Special Collections. So the students come from the Justice and Legal Thought Scholars Program, And then they complete this internship as a practicum part of this. I believe it's 3 semesters long in total, in order to graduate from the scholars program with like a special mark on their transcript. And they work 90 hours through a 16-week semester, sorry, to earn 2 credits. And unfortunately, I'm not able to provide funding for them, but I'll get into that later because I would like to personally, but we'll talk about that in a minute. So because it's a professional development oriented program, I try to interview all applicants. There's usually 6 to 10. So it gives them a little bit of experience with that. And I tend to give them feedback afterwards as well. So students come from a variety of different degree programs and backgrounds with various interests. The legal thought track works well for us because our university and subsequently the libraries include social justice efforts as part of their strategic plan. So we usually take on 2 to 3 interns, and then they get to kind of pick their social justice issue and explore the collections and build their own exhibits by the end of the semester. Next slide, please. So the focus of the program is on exhibition curation and archival research, but I do tend to incorporate like crit lib and critical archives literature and experiences. So they get to meet with other curators and functional team members throughout the semester as well. And then the program's grown over the last 3 years, thanks to some feedback and assessment from the interns and other librarians. Programs like this, the TPS Fest, are always helpful as well. And then I like the students' experience, their learning experience, to be kind of very constructivist. So they all have different backgrounds. I like them to learn from each other and to build on those experiences. So it's very social and active, and we just kind of sit around a big table and all work, not necessarily all together, but it's kind of an open forum where people can just say whatever they're thinking and we can talk about it. I also like to check in and see how they're applying these skills to other parts of their lives and their education, because I think that transferable skill is really important as well. And then the other little piece that I like to focus on is multiple literacies. So obviously the primary source bit comes in, search literacy, how to do that, visual literacy, and just how you can combine them and why they're important. So I'll get into that in a second, but if I can go to the next slide. So just from assessments in the past, I've learned that undergraduates kind of like a bit of structure. They like to know when things are due. They want deadlines, you know, what are we doing and when? So we worked last semester to kind of develop a week by week tentative schedule. And this pretty much worked out almost to the week. Obviously some hiccups happened, but it seemed pretty ideal. So in the middle, you can see there's a variety of tools and strategies that I use. I try to mix it up so it's a little different each week. And then eventually they kind of guide their own way through the whole thing. And then I'm just there to kind of chat every now and then. We have an extensive list of deliverables, which are the last column, but they've all been pretty confident about getting them done. So, and I tend to incorporate a lot of graphic design stuff because that's what my background is in. So I like them to learn those types of things. And next slide. Then, so at the end of the semester, they present to the special collections staff on their experiences and what they learned. And you can see an overview of what they brought up here. And they also provided tours for the new class of legal thought scholars and completed posters for, I'll call it a symposium-like event. It's basically just promoting the scholars program, but it's helpful for them to know how to do those posters. And then from just hearing them, my little proud moment was hearing them give their tours and talking about gaps in collections and how neutrality is a myth. And you know, that was completely unprompted. So that was kind of the cool thing that they kind of picked this out of all of the conversations that we had. This also gave us 60+ visitors and tours to our reading room, which is great for us because our spring semester instruction stats tend to dip. So just another little added bonus in that way. And then we also got one in the slide here who is considering doing the dual library science and history degree program. So we got one, guys. Sounds great. Hopefully she comes to the dark side. But after the internship was over, I sat down with them for a roundtable discussion to get feedback and make assessments. And I would say my biggest learned lesson is just to do that in general. And that a structure is really important as well. However, I think that structure requires support. And for me, being a student employee, that was a little bit hard to get. So I'm still working on it, but they're going to hire somebody they're rebranding this who would be my supervisor if they start before I leave. I don't know what's going to happen with that. It's been since October, but so I'm still trying to work on that, and I'm hoping that we can get some funding for them, and that we can continue this as a model for future internships and, you know, just in the library system in general. So that pretty much concludes my part, and I'll go ahead and pass it on to Miriam. I think you're next, right? Yeah. Okay. Thank you, guys.
Yep, indeed. Thanks, Scotty. So hi, everyone. My focus today is on how at Ohio University, our program and support for students creating digital exhibits in particular has evolved basically since the pandemic lockdown, which is more or less when we started creating digital exhibits. First, a bit about the students involved. Most work either in archives and special collections or in digital initiatives. These two departments are, of course, very closely linked in terms of the highly collaborative work that we do with digital initiatives, making it possible for materials from archives and special collections to be fully accessible online and paired with the most robust possible descriptive information. So we have both student employees who are paid and interns who receive course credit. In recent years, we've started finding that a student often begins as an intern in archives and special collections, then loves the work so much that they go on to apply to work as a paid employee, either continuing on in archives and special collections or moving into digital initiatives, which employs more students than archives and special collections does. And this is almost an ideal scenario, as the students already have a solid basis for working with collections materials. And multiple times it's meant that the student who, during their internship, processed a given collection, doing all the research and knowledge development and preparing the finding aid, then gets to be immersed in the next step of the process, including preparing materials for digitization, learning to scan or photograph, translating the finding aid information into metadata for the digital files, and seeing the final product online and fully available. So in archives and special collections, we have a competitive undergraduate intern program for which students apply semesterly. We also often work with a libraries-wide intern who usually does about a 6-week rotation with one or both of our departments. We also hire student employees, usually up to 5 in archives and special collections, and about double that in digital initiatives where there are only 2 full-time employees. There's also graduate assistantship in rare books, but since this panel is about undergraduates, I will not delve into that here. I will point out that all the thumbnails for the digital exhibits that you see on this slide were created in the past year by students. And I know I'm biased, but they are all so varied and fantastic and taught me so much that I never knew about the collections, which is part of what I love about this process. So perhaps like many of you here, we began creating digital exhibits during the pandemic lockdown when we were exploring new ways of continuing to connect students, faculty, researchers, and the local community with our collections. We were fortunate that our full-time digital initiative staff members were willing and able to separately go physically into work once that became possible to continue digitizing material, prioritizing items that archives and special collections staff seeking to do virtual instruction wanted and needed. Even as lockdown ended, and still today, many continue to work remotely or in a hybrid fashion, including some of our students. So we need projects that they can work on where we can track progress entirely virtually. Much of that work has to do with metadata and transcription, but where there is a need and interest for a final project or product, digital exhibits are often a good option. Since lockdown, our exploration of new and creative approaches to connecting people with collections has continued. Even though we're almost entirely back in the classroom and in person, we now recognize the value in having digital content that goes beyond the digital archives. Content that can be used by anyone, anywhere, in a variety of different ways. Content that reaches people who cannot or will not ever physically come to visit us. Content that can be used by classes that are too big to visit us. Content that meets accessibility requirements and makes materials accessible and available to those who use various adaptive and supportive technologies. Finally, we want our students to walk away not only with having accomplished whatever was within the parameters of their position, but with real life, highly relevant and transferable professional skills, with confidence that their perspective and voice is valuable, meaningful, and worth recording and making widely and publicly available, that they've become the expert in the materials they worked with, and that specific expertise often surpasses what the curator has time to develop. That they have something to teach others, and that they can walk away with a link in their resume, CV, or portfolio that demonstrates their advanced level of learning, skill, and contribution. So once again, on this slide, even if you can't really read the list, you can see that 6 of the 9 digital exhibits created in 2023 were created by students. So of course, having so many students creating so many different digital exhibits meant that we needed to formalize our process a bit. This culminated in what we call our exhibits handbook, screenshotted on this slide, which is basically a LibGuide outlining the policies and steps to creating exhibits, both physical and digital. The digital portion includes a table of tools and platforms that our team has tested and feels comfortable being used, that have met our accessibility requirements, or that can be made to meet them. We're always looking to add to this list, and right now are creating our first exhibit using Scalar. I will say that this documentation is in the process of being re-examined and further streamlined to hopefully make it even easier to use. We know that most students won't read every word of the policies or the instructions, but they do now have a specific place to go to for information, in addition to, of course, turning to us with questions. I do want to be clear that supporting and supervising students creating digital exhibits takes significant staff investment. It takes a lot of time to help them develop a vision and plan of approach, learn to write text for the online environment, create for a wide and not necessarily expert audience, ensure they are telling a coherent story with some kind of narrative arc, check that the images reflect the rented content, the exhibit is driven by what visuals are available, and that all accessibility checks have been successfully completed. In addition, the different platforms have very different learning curves that also vary based on the experience and comfort level of each student. We have decided that this time is worth spending because we've been so thrilled with the results, but we've also had conversations about other kinds of digital projects students might engage in that would still let them walk away with a tangible product, but that might require a bit less support. This is an ongoing conversation that will likely evolve from semester to semester, depending on the students we have, their interests, and the work that we and they hope to accomplish. Finally, looking ahead, we hope to attract more diverse students from more diverse backgrounds, including fields of study. The latter is happening already in ways we are excited about, with recent students not just from history and English, but from biology and environmental studies. But we want it to happen even more and to move beyond fields of study. We want to highlight more marginalized and underrepresented voices and stories than what is currently available in our digital exhibits to better reflect their existence in our collections. We want, as I already mentioned, to continue to experiment with different platforms and tools that maximize our ability to tell a compelling story in the most accessible possible format. We want to develop ways to increase engagement with our digital content, whether that means better promotion, more bringing the exhibits into the classroom, or working more with external collaborators. And we need to create a way to assess the experience of users accessing our digital exhibits. Right now, apart from gathering whatever basic statistics are available through the individual platforms, we are not gathering any other information about who is accessing our digital exhibits, for what purposes, and with what kind of response. This is all information we would love and need to have to help us improve our student digital exhibits program moving forward. That ends my portion, so thank you, and I really look forward to questions and conversation later.
All right. Thanks, Miriam. So I'm Carolyn Runyon, and again, I'm at the University of Tennessee at Chattanooga. And the example that I'm going to present today is an assignment-based group project for which the course instructor and I drew upon strategies from high-impact practices and experiential learning to create narratives and select resources for 5 exhibition panels featuring our local content. Miriam, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide. Thank you. So because the class was for the modern civil rights struggle, the instructor and I really wanted to focus on using HIPs because research shows that HIPs can positively impact marginalized communities that higher ed has sort of traditionally underserved. And so we reckon that most of the opportunities for students to curate exhibitions on our campus for undergrads were typically unpaid internships. And so we thought that we would make this an option as a class assignment to maybe help mediate that gap and give folks who can't afford to take an unpaid internship for academic credit an opportunity to work on this kind of project. We also had a more pragmatic reason. The instructor had received an internal grant to employ HIPs in the class. And so we wanted to make sure we met that internal funding mandate, of course. Specifically, we wanted to create a collaborative assignment. We had a goal to bring together groups of students to learn with and from each other. This meant that we would not only create a group assignment, that we would also dedicate a portion of the class to graded peer review, to offer critical feedback on materials and narratives that folks had offered. And I'll talk a little bit more about that later. Finally, we want to offer an opportunity for students to connect classroom knowledge to real world activities. And so while the university does not offer a degree in public history, we know there are a significant number of students who are interested in pursuing that kind of exhibition public history work, particularly students of history, anthropology, and English majors. So much so that there is now a class that is dedicated to sort of curation and exhibition work taught by an anthropology professor. So because we know that we have lots of folks who are interested in pursuing memory work after graduation, that was another sort of reason that we thought this might be a good way to meet some of the needs of our students. And then as a historian, my instructor colleague wanted to focus on the interpretation of primary sources, not necessarily the discovery. So the primary source literacy learning objectives, they're taken from the SAA, ACRL, RBMS guidelines, are really structured and streamlined to support this very specific assignment. The instructor and I also wanted to break down the assignment into manageable sections. So we tried to model a method for project management and iteration throughout the project. If we could do the next slide, please. So we started with an individual assignment. And so we wanted students to identify, analyze a minimum of 2 historically significant and relevant sources that came from special collections. And so to guide them in this, I created a course guide based on themes from the syllabus. That course guide borrows language directly from the syllabus. And there are areas where I felt that we had enough information for undergraduate students to make an argument, a historical argument in an exhibit. This was also followed up, so an instruction session that I taught in their classroom, how to use the course guide, how to make an appointment with me, and then they had a requirement that they needed to come in for a one-on-one research appointment and get some help in navigating the physical holdings. So there was a lot of labor front-ended on this project to make sure that this was successful in a class environment where, I might more typically do an exhibition style project in a one-on-one internship environment. Could we do the next slide, please? After students selected their items, which I kept track on in this sort of insane spreadsheet, like I do many of my projects, the students were given an assignment. They were assembled into their groups and they had to author a brief narrative that accompanied the sources that they had selected. And so we started our support for this. We went on a field trip to the Civil Rights Institute in Birmingham, Alabama, where students were given an exercise to reflect on the exhibitions that they saw and think about strategies that the Civil Rights Institute was using in their own physical installations. And after the field trip, students returned for a work session in special collections. I had flagged all the materials that they had selected and identified individually, and then gave them access to their entire sort of collections that I'd curated so that they could revise selections as part of their group and work through their materials together. We followed that up with an instruction session a few weeks later where the groups had already submitted draft narratives. And then because we wanted to focus on iteration and improving text over time, the students who had submitted their drafts, and then we reviewed those drafts and sort of looked at where are students falling, where do we see need for improvement, and gave some targeted instruction on how to write to an exhibition narrative, about style, about audience, about how to incorporate text-based resources through quoting and exhibit panels and that sort of thing. And then they were instructed to revise the first draft of their narrative and make their final selections and put together sort of this little mock-up of a panel where they included images of their finalized resources that I provided to them. So in our final session, the instructor and I co-led peer assessment activity. And we kicked off that peer assessment with an individual reflection on how peer reviews have worked for them in the past, what worked, what didn't work. And that was really helpful in making sure the students really worked hard to give each other helpful, useful feedback, not the kind of feedback that maybe they'd experienced in the past, and avoid some of those pitfalls that can come with reviewing one another's work. Can we do the next slide, please? So the end result were 5 great sort of big retractable banner exhibitions featuring all sorts of great content from special collections. The students submitted their final projects, and then instead, because part of the class's learning objectives was not to do like sort of the digital design, and there weren't a lot of digital literacy learning outcomes for this class, we partnered with a colleague in the library, in the library studio, which is sort of the creative lab on campus. And my colleague was able to build these 5 retractable banners using all the great content that our students found, and their great narratives. And so these were displayed in special collections. The students were invited to an opening so they could see them on display and see where the work ended up. And I continue to periodically display them in front of special collections or on other areas of the library. Can we do the next slide, please? And then finally, students were asked to reflect on their whole experience. And some of those reflections were published on the library's blog with permission of the student, of course. And that's it. So I want to, if we could do the next slide, I want to offer my sincere gratitude to the instructor, colleagues, and students who helped me make this fresh interpretation of the civil rights movement in Chattanooga a reality. Thank you.
Okay, and hi, I am the last presenter, and then we'll get around to our discussion. So I've been kind of peeking at the Padlet as we go, and I can see one of the top questions is, how do you start a program like this if you have nothing? And I do kind of go through this in mind, how I started from nothing. And I think we can also highlight there's many different ways that you can get into this process of having student curated exhibits. Like you've already seen, you can partner with existing internships or classes, or maybe start thinking about how students can exhibit and participate in different types of ways. My experience begins with this one student worker in our library, Joelle, who had been a student worker with us for 3 years and then was awarded an ARL fellowship for digital and inclusive excellence. He didn't quite know what he was going to do with that fellowship, but he knew that he wanted to work in the archives for part of it. And he was also an IDM major, which at our engineering school is kind of the most artsy of the majors that our engineering school has. It's integrated digital media. So a little bit of computer science, but also some art and design. Having this fellowship allowed him to just spend a lot of time kind of hanging out in the archives and in our collections. So he kind of gravitated towards looking at our yearbook collection, which goes from 1887 up until the yearbook stopped being made in 2009. That's a whole other thing where I tried to revive. It didn't quite work. But anyway, over 100 years of yearbooks that he started looking at. And then he was really taken by this, looking at students who were similar to him, who identified as Black and Latino over the years, and was really fascinated by this. One of the things that he kept talking about was like, I feel like in 2019, 2020, there's still kind of a perception that like at engineering school, I'm one of the first Black or Latino students here, or I'm very much in the minority in the engineering field. And he was like, what I'm finding is actually that's not really true. I'm seeing this whole past that I can connect with. And what was really cool beyond that kind of personal recognition as I was working with him and having him kind of develop this and see this was that as he developed the idea for the project, his idea was to create this apparel project, so a clothing line. And that was the way that he wanted to get this idea across. So he wanted to find all of these images And then he was designing them and putting them on clothing. So the plan was going to be that in the spring of 2020, he would have made all these t-shirts and people would have been walking around campus saying, "What's on your shirt?" which would open up conversations about these histories and about our archival collections as well. Of course, because this was 2020, this plan didn't get completely realized. Sorry for the sirens. If we can go to the next slide. He ends up, and I'll put this link in the chat. He ends up pivoting. He makes a website. I just put the link to his website in the chat. So this is his own kind of interpretation of how he was able to pull these together and curate this in his way. And then we were able to write up. So we did have the mock-ups of the t-shirts. We wrote an article about this in Archival Outlook a few years ago. And then finally, when we were like a little more consistently back on campus, I printed the t-shirts, not totally in the way that he would have originally, but at least well enough to get the idea across, was able to put them up and kind of tell more of this story of what he had put together. By this point, this student had already graduated 2 years ago. So this was like a little of like a rocky start because of the pandemic and the student wasn't still here and like he had curated ideas, but things got interrupted and I kind of put it together at the end. But this was the kernel of my idea for wanting all of our physical exhibits within our library to be curated by our students. And again, we are at an engineering school, so this means that I need to get the engineers engaged and interested and have time somehow to be able to curate these exhibits. So next slide. So the way that I did this was to pitch. So I'm both a liaison librarian to the one, this is like also where Joelle's major was, the one department at our school, technology, culture, and society, which is kind of like, you know, STEM adjacent. And then all the other engineering departments. I was able to pitch a course, a 4-credit course within my department to teach this, to have students actually be able to work with our archival collections and do research as one of our writing and research intensive courses. This also took a couple years, like between when I pitched and when I actually got it off the ground. But this was really inspired a lot by this student's work and by the work that I'd been doing in my one-off sessions with students in other people's writing classes and other kind of like ethics classes within this department, because students kept saying they were interested in this. They asked, could there ever be an archives course? And as I'm sure everyone's experienced, when you get students working with your collections, they discover new things, they interpret things in different ways, their experiences come through in really cool ways. And so this all kind of came together to culminate in making this course, which I was like, great, I now have 18 undergrad researchers. In the course, I had them, after they were exposed to, you know, collections within our archives, they needed to pick what they wanted to work on. Some of the students got really interested in something that might be within their subject area, like the history of computer science or electronics or things like that. And some of them really were drawn to more of this kind of identity work, whether it was religion or gender or ethnic background or what have you, or student clubs that maybe they were interested in. And so students could kind of pick whatever. For the class, they needed to do a bunch of writing and they were making these Omeka sites. So they were making digital exhibits. But once students had made the digital exhibits, then I kind of had a pool of students who were familiar with the archives, doing archival research, had already kind of sketched out this work. And so I could tap those students that were like really engaged in this and interested to come and work as a student curator. I pitched this both to the director of the library and to the students as this not super costly, not super labor intensive thing because they'd already done so much work. So really averaging just 5 hours a week. That's $16.75 an hour that they were getting paid as student curators is just our basic undergrad rate at New York University. So they were able to do this over the course of a semester. Basically, they rework the research that they had done to think about how can this present physically within our exhibit cases. And then the next semester, we actually install the exhibit. They give a research talk about the work that they did, and they pick some other type of engagement activity to do with people. So spring 2023 was the first one that all came together. This was Knoll. This is from the donor, Michael Knoll, and the picture phone. Michael Knoll had worked at Bell Labs on the picture phone. We got some picture phones loaned to us from the Bell Labs archives, and Tommy Q was the computer science major who put this together. And then my next slide, two more. This is just to show that this has continued to happen each semester since that first one with Tommy. I've been really excited that all of the topics have been really different, and students have come from different majors. So we've had a business and technology management major, we've had a sustainable urban environments major, we're having a biomolecular science pre-med major, and everyone's looked into these different topics. So from the picture phone to the Muslim experience at NYU Tandon to these consequences of our campus development and neighborhood displacement. You can see here, there's like these pinch hitters coming in from my grad student assistants in the archives this semester, because I'm actually going to be out on sabbatical. So they're exploring the idea of what does it take to build an archive and some hidden labor ideas, but then we're popping right back into a student, an undergrad lined up to look at our Wunsch building. Telling a lost story is that this, our building that the college bought was formerly a church and purportedly a stop on the Underground Railroad, which everyone gets really excited to talk about, but there was not that much information about it. So actually, this is a really interesting look too at all these archival silences about the Black churches in our neighborhood, especially compared to the extensive history of the white churches in the neighborhood. Okay, so then our final slide for me. Okay, this is just a little text exchange with Madi, one of our student curators, just to show hearts and good vibes all around. Like the students who have participated in this project, even though there's only a few of them that have gone through this pipeline, all of them have done such incredible work. All of them have really been very excited by the work. It's made me so happy. I really love that our space is now populated with the work of students and that other students can see that. And even so, I still have a lot of questions and things that I still need to work out if I'm really considering this to be a sustainable program. I think this has been mentioned through other presenters today too, but I kind of need to think about how I can get more voices involved, how to make sure that something's really sustainable beyond just me or just like a one-time thing. Thinking about that assessment and student input is also going to be a big deal. And then, I don't know, to really solidify something, naming funding, I don't know, we'll see. But this is my experience, and it would be great to move into our discussion, I think, with everyone about what other people have experienced, or questions that we all have, or lessons learned. There we go.
And so I've been keeping kind of a running tab of things that people are upvoting and commenting on, and combining that with some of the chatter that has been in the chat feed. And the big lesson learned is about student empowerment, and giving them the power to curate exhibits, and how that kind of fuels this different passion for something that they might not have considered as a way to get into that, or to use those items as things that would be beneficial in their own field. So at least that's been my experience anyway, and I think that it's great to touch undergrad students and let them know that archives are for everyone. You don't have to be, a history graduate. You don't have to be a PhD. Like, it's for everybody. Anybody can come and look at these materials. So that's always been like the kind of fun part for me, and seeing how they pull that out. But if any of my fellow panelists would like to add to that.
I mean, just to really agree that I think I spoke to that in my presentation, but it's definitely been the experience. And I feel like it's different from You know, even if they get to create a finding aid, because a digital exhibit, like they really put their own voice into it. And it's a more personal undertaking than writing a finding aid, even though they're like learning so much and it's still, you know, something they could link to in a CV or resume. I think it doesn't feel, they don't feel as invested in it. And that's kind of been a really big difference.
Yeah, I agree with everybody's comments. I really like working with students and their ability to curate exhibits in a wide variety of ways. You know, one of the things that I think that the comment and the lessons learned in the Padlet touches on is this idea that students listen to each other and respond to other students. And so having something curated by students generates a degree of popularity in the exhibit that we don't get if we curate it ourselves, at least in my shop. So I wonder if that's been true for others.
Yeah, I totally agree. I mean, I also feel like the longer I've now been at my job for 13 years. And so in the first almost decade of that, I feel like it was kind of like, okay, you are the archive, so put up some exhibits. And not only is that like a lot of work, but I was like, I feel like all anyone's getting is just like me over and over again, even if I'm highlighting, sorry, even if I'm highlighting different collections, it's always coming through. It's just me. And like, I really, yes. So I totally agree. I think there's more excitement with other students being able to make that connection. And also it's just been so much more rewarding to see our collections like used and imagined and put forward in these different ways from different people.
Do we want to take like, if there's a question, because we're almost out of time, and I don't know if there's like a pressing question in the chat that we could try to answer.
Yeah, I think
Yeah, or if we want to show the Padlet too, you want to look up.
I can do that. Go ahead, Scotty, while I do that.
The top question in the Padlet is how to get started. And so, Lindsay, you kind of touched on that with your program. For me, it was kind of something that was already in progress, and then I just got to take it and run with it. And I did it based on like my previous experiences. When I graduated undergrad, my first internship was at the Kennedy Center, and it's a huge actual like program with like 20 students who go to different departments. So I wanted something that was kind of structured, and it's very much like, here's that finished product, and you know, what's our best group of students to reach out to at the time. And because of our strategic plan changing to the social justice thing, it was just kind of a natural choice to pick that. I do think we should probably grow from that and, you know, see what different types of things can come out of that. But I do think that it was a good starting point for my particular program, which is very physical. We don't do a like we do a blog post, but there is no digital output for it. So being able to have students that are on campus who can kind of do that amount of work, I think was important for us. But that has been my experience anyway. And like I said, I've never had any funding or anything to get this done. It's just a matter of working with partners on campus to kind of make it happen.
I think I'm in one of the smaller shops here on the panel, at least, and it's been kind of responsive and opportunistic and entrepreneurial on our end. So I'll have a professor pitch something like, this is a great idea, let's just do it, and just move forward with it. So it's not always that systematic. We always have something in our physical display cases, but it is, whether it's curated by some archivists or students, it depends on who we've got at any given time, because we don't have the funding to support a paid student exhibition curator every year, every semester, or something like that. So, you know, even if you just do one and do it once, that's okay too. You know, you did it once, that you can get it started and people know it's there, and they can partner with you again, or you can let it drop. That's okay as well. And I don't think that's a fail. Anytime we get some content out there is great.